The bustling hum of wealth and privilege filled the air at La Belle Vie, an opulent gem nestled in the heart of Manhattan. It was the kind of place where chandeliers dripped with crystal and every corner whispered exclusivity. Waiters in immaculate uniforms glided across the room, balancing silver trays bearing dishes too artistic to eat. The restaurant was a sanctuary for the city's elite, where they sipped wine older than most people in the room and discussed stocks, art acquisitions, or exotic vacations. Lucas Tavaris sat at his usual table by the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city's shimmering skyline. His posture was perfect, his tailored suit an extension of his sharp, unyielding persona. Lucas was a man who commanded respect, a billionaire with a reputation for precision and control. Yet, tonight, beneath the polished exterior, a strange unease clawed at him. It wasn't the business deal that had occupied his thoughts earlier, nor the predictable dullness of yet another high society dinner. No, this was deeper, a gnawing void he couldn't name. As he swirled his glass of Bordeaux, his eyes flitted across the room, indifferent to the lavish scene, until something unexpected disrupted the rhythm. The door swung open, and a figure entered, a stark anomaly in this world of perfection. The man was disheveled, his clothes worn and mismatched, his face shadowed by the weariness of the streets. He clutched a small object close to his chest, a necklace that seemed utterly out of place in his rough hands. His name was Jose, though no one in the restaurant cared to know that. He was just another nameless homeless man to them, a blemish on their pristine evening. Jose hesitated, scanning the room with hopeful eyes, though they were met only with disdain. Gathering his courage, he approached a waiter. "Oui, je suis unlikeliest tu." "Please," Jose's voice cracked with humility. Could you give me something to eat? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new information." The waiter froze, caught between compassion and fear of the manager's wrath. Before he could respond, the restaurant's manager stormed forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor like gunfire. "What do you think you're doing here?" the manager barked, his tone sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. "This is La Belle Vie, not a soup kitchen. Get out. Now." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that is louder than any noise. All eyes were on Jose as he clutched the necklace tighter, his face flushed with shame. I'm sorry," Jose stammered. "I didn't mean to." The manager grabbed his arm and shoved him toward the door. "Take your pity act elsewhere." Lucas, who had watched the scene unfold with detached curiosity, suddenly froze, his gaze locked on the necklace in Jose's hand, a simple silver chain with a heart-shaped pendant. A wave of memories surged through him, drowning out the murmurs of judgment from the other patrons. The pendant was unmistakable. He had given it to Clara, his daughter, on her 16th birthday. It had been a rare moment of warmth between them, a fleeting gesture of love in a relationship strained by his rigid expectations. Clara, with her fiery spirit and unyielding independence, had always been a mystery to him. 5 years ago she had vanished, leaving nothing behind but a gaping hole in his life and a single cryptic note: "I need to find myself." "Wait!" Lucas's voice cut through the tension, commanding immediate attention. He rose from his seat, his heart pounding. "Where did you get that necklace?" Jose, already halfway out the door, stopped and turned, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. It was given to me by a young woman years ago." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. What was her name?" he demanded, his tone urgent. "Clara," Jose replied softly, the name like a dagger to Lucas' chest. She helped me when I had nowhere to go. She said this was important to her. The room seemed to blur around Lucas as memories of Clara flooded his mind. Her laughter, her stubborn defiance, her dreams of becoming a writer. How had she ended up crossing paths with a man like Jose? Where had she been all these years? The patrons of La Belle Vie stared, their curiosity piqued, but their empathy non-existent. Lucas ignored them. Without hesitation, he approached Jose. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady but laced with a rare vulnerability. "We need to talk." Outside the restaurant, the cold night air hit them both, a stark contrast to the warmth of the lavish interior. Lucas guided Jose to a nearby cafe, its modest setting a far cry from the extravagance they had just left behind. Over steaming cups of coffee, Jose shared his story. "She found me in an alley," he began, his voice heavy with gratitude. "I was at my lowest. She gave me food, helped me find shelter. She didn't have much herself, but she said kindness was the only thing that mattered." Lucas listened intently, piecing together fragments of Clara's life through José's words. It was both a revelation and a torment to hear of her struggles, her generosity, her resilience. He had always assumed she would be safe, that her defiance was a phase she'd outgrow. But now he realized how little he had truly understood her. As the conversation drew on, Jose hesitated, reaching into his tattered coat. "She left me something," he said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "She told me to keep it safe in case I ever saw someone who cared about her." Lucas unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a letter written in Clara's unmistakable handwriting. Her words spilled onto the page like a floodgate of emotion. Her reasons for leaving, her struggles, her hope that one day they might understand each other. Tears blurred Lucas's vision as he read, the weight of his failures as a father crashing down on him. But amidst the pain, a spark of determination ignited within him. "I have to find her," Lucas said, his voice firm. "Will you help me?" Jose nodded without hesitation. "She saved my life. It's the least I can do." As they left the cafe, Lucas felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time, he was willing to tear down the walls of pride and control that had defined him. For the first time, he was ready to fight for his daughter. And so began their journey. A billionaire and a homeless man, bound by a shared connection to a woman who had touched them both in ways they couldn't fully grasp. The streets of Manhattan, cloaked in the muted glow of streetlights, stretched out like veins feeding the city's insatiable hunger for power and privilege. For Lucas Tavaris, the crisp night air was unfamiliar. He rarely walked these streets. They were the domain of others. The desperate, the forgotten, the unseen. Yet here he was, striding beside Jose, a man whose life could not have been further from his own. The billionaire and the beggar, an unlikely pair united by a single silver necklace and a name that bound them both to a shared purpose: Clara. The sharp contrast between the two men was glaring. Lucas, with his straight-backed posture and designer overcoat, exuded authority and wealth, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement like a metronome of privilege. Jose shuffled beside him, his shoulders hunched as though carrying the weight of invisible chains. His threadbare jacket was no match for the biting wind, and his eyes darted around, wary of the judgmental stares they both knew too well. In this moment, the city became a stage where their disparity played out in stark relief. Lucas, an emblem of opulence, and Jose, a specter of society's neglect. "Thank you," Jose murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of passing cars. "For listening to me back there. Most people, they don't." Lucas glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "You mentioned Clara helped you once. She wouldn't have done that if she didn't see something worth helping." Jose's face tightened as though the words were both a balm and a reminder of old wounds. "She didn't judge me," he said quietly, "not like everyone else." The memory of Clara's defiance against his own judgment echoed in Lucas's mind. She had always been the one to challenge him, to see the world through a lens he couldn't understand. It was both her gift and her curse, and now, it seemed, her absence had created a void in more lives than just his own. They reached a small park bench under a flickering lamppost, its dim light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Lucas gestured for Jose to sit, his usual sense of control now tinged with an unfamiliar softness. For the first time in years, Lucas felt the distance between himself and another human being narrow, not through words, but through the silent understanding of shared pain. "I need to know everything you remember," Lucas said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "How did you meet her? Where was she living? Anything." Jose hesitated, his fingers instinctively reaching for the necklace, now tucked under his shirt. "It was about 4 years ago," he began. "I was sleeping outside a church uptown. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, and I was too proud to beg. She came along. She had this light about her, you know? She didn't look at me like I was trash. She sat down next to me, handed me a sandwich, and said, 'No one deserves to be invisible.'" The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. Invisible. Was that how Clara had felt in his world of boardrooms and bottom lines? Had she fled because he'd failed to see her, really see her? "She came by every few days after that," Jose continued, his gaze distant, lost in the memory. "Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she just sat and talked. She told me she'd left home, but she never said why. She didn't complain, though. She just wanted to help." Lucas's jaw tightened, a wave of guilt washing over him. How could his daughter, with her boundless compassion, have found more solace in a stranger than in her own father? And yet, it was clear that Clara's kindness had left an indelible mark on Jose, just as her absence had left a scar on Lucas. "What happened after that?" Lucas pressed. Jose, hesitated again, his hand trembling slightly as he reached into his coat pocket. One day she gave me this letter," he said, pulling out the worn piece of paper Lucas had read earlier. "She said it was for someone she hoped would come looking for her someday. Then she was gone." "Gone where?" Lucas demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Jose flinched, the shame of his helplessness evident. "I don't know, she didn't say, but she mentioned a bookstore once, somewhere upstate." The lead was tenuous, a thread barely strong enough to hold hope, yet, for Lucas, it was enough. Determination flared in his chest, mingling with an ache he couldn't shake. He stood abruptly, his commanding presence returning as though summoned by the enormity of the task ahead. "We'll start there," he said firmly. "I'll find her." Jose blinked up at him, startled by the decisiveness in Lucas's voice. "You mean, you want me to come with you?" "Yes," Lucas replied without hesitation. "You knew her when I didn't. You might see something I miss." The suggestion seemed to unnerve Jose, who shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not exactly someone people trust," he said bitterly. "Most of them see me and think I'm going to rob them." Lucas met his gaze, his expression softening just enough to be disarming. "Then it's a good thing I don't care what they think. If you find the story we bring today interesting, please comment great. If you feel the story's not attractive, please comment, need more drama." The words hung between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken. Lucas was used to being judged, though for vastly different reasons. If wealth had afforded him power, it had also made him a target for envy and resentment. And now, here he was, aligning himself with a man society had deemed unworthy. It was ironic. almost poetic. A collision of two worlds that had no business intersecting. As they began their journey, the city's glittering skyline loomed behind them, a metaphor for the chasm they sought to bridge. For Lucas, this was no longer just about finding Clara. It was about redemption, about proving to himself, and perhaps to her, that he could be more than the cold, calculating man she had left behind. For Jose, it was a chance to repay the kindness that had saved him, a chance to matter in a way he hadn't dared to hope for. The night stretched on, their steps echoing against the concrete like the ticking of a clock. Lucas and Jose walked side by side, their silence heavy with purpose. Somewhere out there, Clara was waiting, and for the first time in years, Lucas felt like he was moving toward something real, something worth fighting for. It was a journey neither man had expected, but one they both needed. The billionaire and the beggar, united not by circumstance, but by love. The kind of love that defies class, judgment, and even time itself. The morning light spilled across the city like liquid gold, softening the harsh edges of Manhattan's skyline. Lucas and Jose stood at the edge of the Grand Central Terminal, a structure as grand as the chasm separating their lives. For Lucas, this station was merely a gateway to business meetings in distant cities. For Jose, it represented a world he had only ever glimpsed in passing, the polished marble floors as foreign to him as the idea of stability. Yet here they were, bound by a single purpose. Their train ticket read Maplewood, a small town upstate where Lucas hoped the faint trail Clara had left behind might finally lead to her. The name felt unfamiliar on Lucas's tongue, an echo of something simple and unadorned, a stark contrast to his life of excess. As the train lurched forward, the rhythm of its wheels on the tracks matched the quickening beat of Lucas's heart. He stared out the window, watching the skyscrapers shrink into the distance. His mind slipped into the past, memories flooding him with an intensity that stole his breath. He saw Clara as she had been at 16, standing on the balcony of their penthouse, her hair catching the golden glow of the sunset. "Dad," she had said, her voice tinged with both frustration and yearning. "Don't you ever wonder what's out there, beyond all of this?" Lucas had barely glanced up from his tablet. "There's nothing out there that isn't already within your reach, Clara. You just have to learn to focus." Her eyes had dimmed then. The light in them shuddered. He hadn't understood at the time what he was snuffing out. Now, as the train surged through the countryside, he felt the weight of her question anew. He hadn't just lost his daughter. He had driven her away. "Lucas," Jose's voice pulled him back to the present. "What is it?" Lucas asked, his tone sharper than intended. Jose hesitated, his gaze lingering on the window as though afraid to meet Lucas's eyes. You think she'll even want to see you?" The question was like a blade cutting through Lucas's resolve. He didn't answer right away, his jaw tightening as he considered the possibility. "I don't know," he admitted finally, the vulnerability in his voice surprising them both. "But I have to try. Crew." The train slowed as it approached Maplewood, the quaint town revealing itself in pieces. Brick buildings lined the main street, their facades faded but full of charm. It was the kind of place Lucas had once dismissed as insignificant, a speck on the map compared to the sprawling empire he controlled. Now, it felt like a portal to another world, a world where Clara had sought refuge from the suffocating expectations he had placed on her. Their first stop was a small cafe, its wooden sign creaking in the breeze. The scent of fresh baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of coffee. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, the hum of quiet conversation, a stark contrast to the sharp, calculated exchanges of boardrooms. Lucas and Jose sat at a corner table, poring over a map of the town and a list of names Jose remembered Clara mentioning. The task felt insurmountable, like piecing together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. "Do you really think she's still here?" Jose asked, doubt creeping into his voice. Lucas tapped his pen against the table, the steady rhythm betraying his impatience. "So she has to be. She left breadcrumbs, that bookstore. She talked about it, didn't she?" Jose nodded, but his expression remained uncertain. "Yeah, but people move on. She might have left again." Lucas's frustration flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. "If she's gone, we'll find where she went next. We're not giving up." The bookstore, a cozy little shop called Turning Pages, was tucked between a florist and a bakery. Its windows were filled with displays of novels, their spines faded from years of sunlight. As they stepped inside, a bell above the door chimed softly, the sound carrying a comforting nostalgia. Lucas scanned the room, his eyes landing on a young woman behind the counter. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore an apron dusted with flour. For a moment, Lucas's breath caught. Was it her? But as the woman turned, he saw her face was unfamiliar. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but wary. "We're looking for someone," Lucas said, stepping forward. "Clara Tavaris. She worked here, or she might still." The woman's expression softened at the mention of Clara's name. "Clara. She hasn't been here in a while, but I remember her. Sweet girl. She helped out part-time before she left." Lucas's heart sank, the hope he had clung to slipping through his fingers. "Do you know where she went?" The woman hesitated, as if weighing whether to share the information. "She talked about moving further upstate, something about needing a fresh start. There's a town called Brookhaven. You might try there." The name was unfamiliar, but it was a lead. Lucas nodded his thanks, his determination hardening. "Let's go." As they left the bookstore, Jose glanced at Lucas, his brow furrowed. "You ever think about what you'll say when you find her?" Lucas didn't respond immediately. The words he wanted to say felt too big, too fragile. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I love you." Instead, he said, "I'll figure it out when the time comes." The road to Brookhaven was winding, the landscape shifting from rolling hills to dense forests. The tension between Lucas and Jose grew as the miles passed, their differences stark against the backdrop of their shared mission. Lucas drove with precision, his hands gripping the wheel as though it were the only thing tethering him to reality. Jose, sitting beside him, fidgeted with the necklace, his silence heavy with unspoken fears. When they finally reached Brookhaven, the sun was beginning to set, casting the town in hues of amber and crimson. Lucas pulled into the parking lot of a diner, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. They stepped inside, the smell of fried food and freshly brewed coffee enveloping them. It was there, in that unassuming diner, that they found their next clue. A waitress who remembered Clara's kindness, who spoke of a small house on the edge of town where she had once lived. Lucas felt a surge of hope, his pulse quickening. They were getting closer. But with each step forward, the weight of his past mistakes pressed heavier on his shoulders. The rhythm of their journey quickened, each lead pulling them further into the unknown, closer to Clara, and to the reckoning that awaited them all. The small house on the edge of Brookhaven stood like a forgotten relic, its paint peeling under the weight of time. The yard was overgrown, a tangle of weeds and wildflowers that seemed to guard the secrets within. Lucas stood frozen at the gate, the sight of the house pulling him into a maelstrom of emotions: hope, fear, guilt. Beside him, Jose clutched the necklace as though it were a talisman, his face lined with quiet determination. "This is it," the waitress had said with certainty. "She used to live here. If she's not here now, someone might know where she went." The air around them felt charged, the stillness broken only by the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Lucas pushed open the gate, its creak like a scream in the silence. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, the weight of 5 lost years pressing down on him. He knocked, the sound echoing in the hollow space of the porch. For a moment, there was no response, and Lucas's heart sank. But then, the door opened a crack, and a pair of familiar eyes peeked out. Eyes that once shone with unbridled curiosity, now shadowed with caution. "Clara," Lucas breathed, his voice trembling. The door opened wider, and there she stood. Clara Tavaris, his daughter, her auburn hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked older, her face etched with lines that spoke of hardship and resilience. But there was no mistaking her. She was still Clara, his Clara. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice breaking like a fragile thread. Lucas stepped forward, but Clara's hand shot up, stopping him in his tracks. "What are you doing here?" "I have been looking for you," Lucas said, his words tumbling out in a rush. Clara, I know I made mistakes. I didn't listen. I didn't see you for who you were, but I'm here now. Please, let me explain." Clara's expression flickered, torn between disbelief and longing. Behind her, the child's voice called out, "Mommy!" "Who's at the door?" Clara turned, revealing a small boy clutching a worn stuffed bear. He couldn't have been more than 3 years old, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. Lucas's heart twisted at the sight. Was this her son? His grandson? "This is my father," Clara said softly, kneeling to the boy's level. "Say hi, Ethan." The boy gave a shy wave, his gaze darting between Lucas and Clara. Lucas knelt, his carefully constructed facade cracking as he looked into Ethan's innocent eyes. "Hi, Ethan," he said gently. "It's nice to meet you." Jose, who had hung back, stepped forward cautiously. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been a long time." Clara's face softened as she saw him, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Jose, you're here too." "Is the one who kept your letter," Lucas explained. "He helped me find you." Clara smiled faintly, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her guarded demeanor. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice wavering. "Yes, I did," Jose replied firmly. "You saved my life, Clara. This was the least I could do." Clara opened the door wider, gesturing for them to come inside. The living room was modest but cozy, filled with books and toys that hinted at a life built on small joys. As they sat, Lucas's gaze lingered on a framed photograph of Clara and Ethan on the mantel. It was a snapshot of a life he had missed, a life he was desperate to understand. Clara spoke hesitantly, her words revealing the struggles she had endured. "After I left, I moved from place to place, trying to figure out who I was. I worked odd jobs, saved what I could, then I found out I was pregnant. Ethan changed everything. He gave me a reason to keep going." Lucas's chest tightened. "Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you tell me?" Clara's eyes flashed with pain. "Because I didn't think you'd understand. You always wanted me to fit into your world, but I couldn't. I needed to build something of my own." Her words were a mirror, forcing Lucas to confront the truth he had avoided for so long. He had tried to mold her into an image of success, blind to the person she truly was. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice raw. "I see that now, and I'm so sorry." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Ethan, sensing the weight of the moment, climbed onto Clara's lap, clutching her hand. "Mommy, are you sad?" he asked innocently. Clara kissed his forehead, her tears spilling onto his curls. No, sweetheart, I'm just surprised." The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Clara's face paled, and she motioned for Ethan to go to his room. "Stay there until I come get you, okay?" Lucas's instincts sharpened as he saw her fear. "Who is it?" "It's them," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "The people I've been running from." Before Lucas could react, the door burst open and two men stormed in, their faces hard and unforgiving. "You thought you could hide forever, Clara," one of them sneered. "We want what you owe us." Lucas stood, his presence towering. "You're not getting anything," he said, his voice like steel. One of the men lunged, but Jose intercepted him, using surprising strength to push him back. The struggle was chaotic, the room a blur of movement and shouts. Clara clutched Lucas's arm, her fear palpable. "They'll hurt Ethan," she whispered. "We have to protect him." Lucas's resolve crystallized. This wasn't just about finding Clara anymore. It was about protecting the family he had rediscovered. Summoning every ounce of courage, he tackled the second man, his years of boardroom battles translating into raw determination. The commotion drew the attention of a neighbor, who called the police. Sirens wailed in the distance as Lucas and Jose managed to subdue the intruders. When the police arrived, the men were arrested, their threats silenced. As the chaos subsided, Clara clung to Ethan, her tears a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Lucas approached her slowly, his heart pounding. "I'm not letting them hurt you," he said softly. "Or Ethan, I promise." Clara looked up at him, her walls crumbling. For the first time, she saw the father she had always wanted, the man willing to fight for her, not control her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming back." Lucas knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "I never stopped looking, Clara, and I never will." In that moment, the broken pieces of their family began to mend, the bonds forged through pain and perseverance stronger than ever. Together, they faced the dawn, a family reunited and ready to rebuild. The golden hues of dawn seeped through the windows of Clara's small house, casting a gentle glow over the aftermath of the previous night's chaos. The air, once charged with fear and adrenaline, now carried a tentative calm. Clara sat curled on the couch, her arms wrapped protectively around Ethan, who was fast asleep, his tiny hands clutching his stuffed bear. The sight was a balm to Lucas's stuffed bear, a reminder of what mattered most. Jose sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee Clara had brewed. His hands trembled slightly as he raised the mug, the scars of his hard life etched into his skin. Lucas joined him, his presence quiet but grounding. They exchanged a glance, a wordless acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. A bond forged through shared struggle and an unspoken promise to protect Clara. "You were brave last night," Lucas said, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, carrying a warmth Jose wasn't accustomed to hearing. Jose shrugged, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "She saved me once. I wasn't about to let her face those guys alone." Lucas nodded, his gaze drifting to the doorway where Clara still sat. "She has a way of bringing out the best in people." The room fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. The events of the night before had shaken them all, but it had also cemented something unbreakable. A family of sorts, bound not by blood, but by choice. As the morning stretched on, Clara carefully placed Ethan back in his bed, tucking the blankets around him. She returned to the living room where Lucas and Jose waited, her steps tentative, as if she were testing the fragile peace that had settled over the house. "I owe you both an explanation," she said, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. She sank into a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Those men, they were part of something I stumbled into years ago, back in New York. I saw something I wasn't supposed to, something dangerous. I ran because I didn't have a choice." Lucas leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Why didn't you come to me? I could have protected you." Clara shook her head, her gaze fixed on the floor. "You were part of a world I didn't trust. I thought if I told you, you'd try to fix everything your way, and I didn't want to be your problem." Her words stung, but Lucas didn't let the pain show. Instead, he focused on what mattered now. "You're not a problem, Clara. You're my daughter. I should have made sure you knew that." Clara looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know it now," she said softly. "And I'm sorry, too, for leaving the way I did." Jose cleared his throat, his gruff voice cutting through the tension. "You both did what you thought was right, but maybe it's time to stop blaming yourselves and start moving forward." The simplicity of his words struck a chord, their truth undeniable. Lucas reached across the table, his hand covering Clara's. "He's right. We've lost too much time already. Let's make the most of what we have now." Clara nodded, her tears spilling over as she squeezed his hand. The moment was small, but it carried the weight of years of misunderstanding, guilt, and love finally finding its way to the surface. The rest of the day unfolded with surprising ease. Lucas took Ethan outside to play, his imposing figure softened as he knelt in the grass, helping the boy build a makeshift fort from sticks and fallen leaves. Clara watched from the porch, her heart swelling at the sight. She had never imagined this, a father who had once seemed untouchable, now crouching in the dirt, laughing with her son. Jose joined them after a while, his laugh rough but genuine as he helped Ethan add defensive walls to their fort. The scene was almost surreal, a patchwork family finding joy in the simplest of things. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they gathered around the small dining table for dinner. The meal was humble, spaghetti and garlic bread Clara had made, but it felt like a feast. The room was filled with the kind of warmth that transcends physical comfort, a warmth born of connection and healing. After dinner, Clara pulled Lucas aside. The house was quiet now, Ethan fast asleep and Jose dozing in the armchair. She led him to a small box tucked away in the corner of her bedroom. Inside were letters, photographs, and keepsakes, fragments of the life she had built since she left. I want you to have this," Clara said, handing him a photograph. It was of her and Ethan, taken at a park, their smiles bright despite the modest backdrop. "So you know we were okay, even when we weren't with you." Lucas stared at the photo, his throat tightening. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." They returned to the living room where Jose stirred awake, grumbling good-naturedly about how uncomfortable the armchair was. Lucas chuckled, his own heart lighter than it had been in years. "We should head back to the city soon," Lucas said, his tone practical but not unkind. "I want to make sure you and Ethan are safe. We can set you up with a better place, security, whatever you need." Clara hesitated, the independence she had fought so hard for, warring with the relief of having support. "I don't want to depend on you," she said finally, "but I think I'd like to be close to you." Lucas smiled, a kind of smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I want." The night ended quietly, the house enveloped in a peace that felt hard-earned. As Clara drifted off to sleep, She dreamed not of running, but of a future where she and Ethan could finally stop looking over their shoulders. Lucas, too, lay awake for a while, his thoughts filled with plans, not for a business deal, but for a life that finally felt meaningful. For the first time in years, the fractured pieces of their lives were coming together. They weren't whole yet, but they were healing. And as Lucas watched the moonlight spill across the room, he knew one thing for certain: they were finally moving forward. Excellent. The gentle hum of the countryside enveloped the small house, a melody composed of rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the soft laughter of a child. Morning light filtered through the curtains like a blessing, painting the walls in warm tones of gold and amber. Clara stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching Ethan chase after a butterfly in the yard. Each of his giggles was a note of joy, a promise that the darkness of the past had not dimmed his innocence. The first time in years, peace felt tangible, not fleeting. A fragile bird perched delicately on her shoulder. Clara smiled to herself, the kind of smile that grew from the roots of hope. Her father's voice drifted in from the kitchen, a low rumble as he discussed plans with Jose. The juxtaposition was startling. Lucas Tavaris, a man whose name had once been synonymous with power and control, now standing shoulder to shoulder with a man society had discarded. Together, they were plotting the future of a family reassembled from shards of loss. "Clara," Lucas called, stepping into the room. His presence was no longer imposing but steady, like the foundation of a house that had finally been repaired. "Come sit with us. We've been talking about what comes next." She turned, her heart swelling at the sight of her father's softened expression. He was different now, still composed, still commanding in his own way, but with a warmth that had been missing for so long. It wasn't just his tone that had changed. It was the way he looked at her, as though he finally saw not the daughter he had wanted her to be, but the woman she had become. Clara joined them at the table where Jose was sketching ideas on a napkin. "We were thinking about the cafe," Jose began, his voice tinged with excitement. "That place near the bookstore, the one with the big bay windows. I could reopen it, make it a place where people feel welcome, like Clara made me feel welcome when I had nothing." Lucas nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. "And I'll help with the funding. It can be a place for the community, a place where people can find warmth and dignity." Clara's chest tightened, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. This wasn't just about a cafe. It was about rebuilding lives, about transforming pain into purpose. "That sounds perfect," she said softly. "But what about you, Dad? You've spent your life running your empire. What happens now?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, his gaze turning contemplative. "I think I've spent too long chasing the wrong things," he admitted. "Wealth, power, control. They don't mean anything if you lose what really matters. I want to focus on family now, on you, and on Ethan." The simplicity of his words struck her like a revelation. He had finally let go of the armor that had once kept them apart, and in its place was a man willing to fight not for his legacy, but for his love. As the day unfolded, the plans for the cafe grew more detailed and the bonds between them deepened. Ethan joined in, scribbling his own blueprints on scraps of paper, his imagination running wild. "There should be cookies, lots of cookies," he declared, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Pookies it is," Jose said with a laugh, ruffling Ethan's hair. "We'll make it the best cafe in town." The scene was idyllic, almost surreal in its simplicity. It wasn't the life Clara had envisioned when she ran away, nor the one Lucas had imagined for his family, but it was real and it was theirs. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they gathered in the yard for a small celebration. Lucas had brought out a bottle of wine he'd saved for a special occasion, and Clara had baked a pie using a recipe she'd learned during her travels. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, its beauty a reflection of their newfound harmony. As they sat around the makeshift table, their laughter and conversation mingled with the sounds of the evening. Clara looked at each of them, her father Jose and Ethan, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, but connection. Not escape, but belonging. "Here's to new beginnings," Lucas said, raising his glass. His eyes met Clara's, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. To family. To family, Clara echoed, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. The toast was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of their journey. Every wound, every regret, every step that had brought them back to each other. Later, after Ethan had fallen asleep in her lap, Clara and Lucas sat side by side on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. Fireflies danced in the darkness, their soft glow like tiny beacons of hope. Lucas broke the silence, his voice low and reflective. "You remind me of your mother," he said. "She had your strength, your kindness. She would be proud of you, Clara." Hatzal Fumi. Tears filled Clara's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I think she'd be proud of you too, for fighting for us, for coming back." Lucas smiled, a quiet, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I'll never stop fighting for you," he said. "For Ethan, for this family." The words settled between them, a promise that needed no embellishment. They sat in silence after that, their hearts full as the stars emerged one by one, lighting the sky like a tapestry of dreams. In the days and weeks that followed, the cafe took shape, its once abandoned walls coming alive with color and warmth. Jose became a beloved figure in the town, his gruff humor and kind heart drawing people in. Lucas visited often, his presence a steady reminder of his commitment to this new chapter of their lives. And Clara, finally free from the shadows of her past, found joy in the simple pleasures of raising Ethan and building a life rooted in love. The house on the edge of Brookhaven became a sanctuary, its walls filled with laughter, its rooms brimming with hope. And though the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined them. They were reminders of how far they had come and how much further they could go. As the seasons turned, the family grew closer, their bonds strengthened by every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every small triumph. They were not perfect, but they were whole, and in their imperfection, they found peace. The journey that had begun with a necklace and a letter ended not in grandeur, but in quiet, enduring love. And for Clara, Lucas, Jose, and Ethan, it was more than enough. It was everything.